She stormed into the house holding an ashtray and smashed it at his feet. "You don't deserve to be a father," she hissed, staring into the eyes of the man she once worshipped. Ash scattered across the rug, mixing with shards of glass and something else, the shattered remnants of trust, the ashes of respect, the charred remains of what once was called family. Margaret stood trembling, not from fear, but from rage and grief. Her fingers curled into fists, nails biting into her palms. And before her, in the rocking chair, sat her son Daniel, 30 years old, self-assured, his gaze cold, as if she were an intruder rather than the woman who carried him, nursed him, and stayed awake through fevered nights when he was 8 and stricken with scarlet fever. "You knew," she said, her voice shaking not from weakness, but from strain, each word dragged out like it was torn from her throat. "You knew she was sick. And you still left." Daniel looked away toward the window, where a fine November rain fell, gray, like his expression. "Mom, it's none of your business." "None of my business?" She stepped closer. The old floorboards groaned beneath her feet, as if affirming her right to this house, this ground, this truth. "I spent a month sitting by her hospital bed while you were out having fun with that." She couldn't finish it. The word whore stuck in her throat, not out of shame, but pain. "Laura's not a whore," he said calmly. "She supports me." "You? You just criticize." "I criticize?" Margaret let out a short, bitter laugh, more like a sob. "I watched your wife Kate die of cancer. I held her hand while she cried at night because you never even came to say goodbye. And you dare talk to me about support." He stood up tall, fit, wearing an expensive shirt Laura probably bought him. Everything about him screamed, "I'm grown. I'm not a child. Leave me alone." "Kate and I had already separated before her diagnosis, Mom. It's not my fault she died. But it is your fault you abandoned her." Silence hung between them, thick as smoke after a fire. Margaret had always considered herself a strong woman. At 70, she still drove her car, cooked Sunday brunch for her grandkids, and could haggle with any Walmart cashier who shortchanged her by a penny. She'd raised 2 children alone. Her husband died in a car crash when Daniel was just 5. She'd given them everything, her savings, her sleep, her best years. Especially Daniel. He was her joy and her heartache, gifted, stubborn, hot-headed. She'd believed that if she loved him just a little more than necessary, he'd become better. But love hadn't saved him. Kate had entered their lives when Daniel was 25. Smart, humble, working as a nurse at the local hospital. She looked at him like he was light itself. And Daniel, it seemed, gave her the same in return. Their wedding was modest but warm. Margaret cried tears of joy. But then everything went wrong. 2 years ago, Kate found a lump in her breast. The diagnosis, aggressive cancer. Treatment began immediately. And from that moment, Daniel began to disappear. First from the hospital, then from the house, then from his wife's life. "He's working too much," Kate would say from her bed, and 4 in her arm. "Don't scold him, Mom." Margaret. But Margaret saw the truth. She saw how his eyes sparkled, not with exhaustion, but with something else, excitement, freedom. He was happy to be free. And when Kate died alone, in a hospital room, with only Margaret by her side and not a single call from her husband, Daniel showed up to the funeral in a new suit, with a woman named Laura. He didn't even cry. "You didn't come to her in her final days," Margaret said softly now, looking at her son. "You didn't answer her last call." Daniel clenched his jaw. "I don't owe you an explanation for every decision I make." "You do. Because I watched her die. Because I caught her tears. And you? You were with that." "Enough," he snapped. "You don't understand anything." "I understand. You just didn't want to be with her once she stopped being beautiful and convenient." "That's not true." "Then why didn't you come?" He fell silent. Something flickered in his eyes. Shame? Or just irritation? "I couldn't." Couldn't or wouldn't? Couldn't. He slammed his fist on the armrest. "I couldn't watch her, like that, die." He looked away. "Yes, but I could," Margaret said. "Because I know how to love even when it hurts." "You don't." The next day, Margaret called a lawyer. She knew Kate had set up a trust fund for their children, 2 little girls, now 4 and 6. As their father, Daniel automatically controlled the money. But if she could prove he'd neglected his wife in her final months, if she could show he'd failed his marital duties. This is complicated, Mrs. Harper, the lawyer said. But possible. Especially with witnesses. There are plenty. She didn't tell her son. Daniel came a week later with Laura. What the hell is this garbage in the paper, Mom? He demanded, throwing the local gazette onto the table. In the community news section, a tiny mention, family dispute over deceased nurse's estate sparks local interest. Margaret didn't flinch. It's not garbage. It's the truth. You're trying to take my daughter's inheritance? I'm making sure it's used for what it was meant for, their health, education, safety. Not your trips to Las Vegas with Laura. Laura flushed. You have no right. I do, Margaret said calmly. Because your Daniel abandoned his wife to die alone. And I didn't. This is personal, he shouted. No, she said. This is responsibility. The trial lasted 3 months. Margaret testified calmly, clearly, without tears. She told it all, how Kate called Daniel every week and got only "I'll call you back" in return, how he missed her final chemotherapy session, how he'd gone on vacation 2 weeks before she died. Nurses, neighbors, even the mailman testified. They all saw Margaret arrive every morning with hot soup and clean sheets. Daniel stayed silent. The court ruled the trust funds would be placed under an independent guardian. Daniel retained visitation rights to his daughters, but access to the money was restricted. Outside the courthouse, he approached her. You destroyed me. No, she said softly. You destroyed yourself. I just wouldn't let you destroy them too. He looked at her, and for the first time in years, she saw not anger in his eyes, but pain. I thought I couldn't handle it. And I thought you could, she said. Because you're my son. A year passed. Daniel didn't call. But one day, there was a knock at the door, and standing there were 2 little girls holding drawings. Grandma Margaret? Yes, darlings. Dad asked us to give you this. Emily, the older one, handed her an envelope. Inside was a photograph. Him with his daughters in the park. On the back, I'm sorry. I'm learning to be a father. Starting from the beginning. Margaret stared at the photo for a long time. Then she carefully placed it in a frame, next to Kate's portrait. Love doesn't die. Not even when betrayed. It only waits until it's earned again.